So I've been, um, as I said, exploring GAPS diet a bit more recently, and I don't know if you've ever looked in or how much you looked into her ideas, because there's a couple of things which you'd probably find interesting. She talks one about ADHD to some extent, and she also
Mm,
talks about cancer.
hmm
Um, and on one video I was watching, she talked about what the development of cancer is. And it's quite well. I think she's a really good communicator in that she talks about things which could be difficult to understand in a way that's very clear and simple to understand. Um, so she was talking in this video about cancer not really being a disease or an illness as such, but the body trying to deal with something,
hmm
um,
Yeah.
which is a different way of looking at it. Because and then I think it opens the question of, well, what is the body trying to deal with precisely here? And if you can start thinking about that, then there's maybe some wins. We talked about stacking as many things as possible in his favour. Um, uh, so yeah, does that, with your greater
Ah,
research into this, does that raise anything for you?
well, it just gels perfectly with how I started. Not so much with the anti-cancer book was very much, oh, you need to stop these things, but he did actually introduce this idea of the terrain theory of medicine
Mm,
as opposed to the germ theory of medicine, and that was a key point for me. This idea that the body's actually adapting to something. And in a short term, that's typically fine. But if it becomes chronic over time, these adaptations like obesity, but putting on excess body fat, diabetes is an adaptation to what's been thrown at the body. It's not an illness. It's not an illness. It's not a disease. It's an adaptation. Is the way would look at it. And the anti-cancer protocol I followed, the Budwig protocol, was very much along those lines. It was like give the body a reason not to need cancer. So it needed cancer to deal with something, with the way stuff was going on. That was its adaptation. And if you look at cancer cells, it seems to be a backwards evolution to non-aerobic metabolism. Yeah, it goes to an anaerobic lactic acid based metabolism and stuff like that. The control systems are set loose. It's almost like, well, the system's not working anymore, so it's every man for himself. And you get this sort of almost like rioting, looting type effect in the body. It's like, well, sod this, we're just going to raid next doors, we're going to just set everyone free, blah, blah, just chaos, anarchy. So, yeah, what that stuff to me sounds very, very similar in concept, and is how I try to look at everything is the evolutionary aspect that we look through as well, is that every organism adapts to the environment it's in. So everything that happens to us, especially stuff when we know we're not catching Ebola or the measles or whatever specific things which are coming from externally, but even then there is something. But all these other things, Alzheimer's, obesity, cancer, diabetes, autoimmune conditions, are all reactions of our body to something that's going on with it, whether it's exposure to external toxins or radioactivity. We know we can get cancer from that, but more often than not, the lack of movement, the lack of proper nutrition, the lack of sleep, and these things with genetic predispositions come out in different ways. So it's like you might have 10 different makes of car, and they have different manufacturing vulnerabilities. With one, it might be the gearbox. With one, it might be the brakes. But if you drive both shoddily and you don't maintain it, and you don't top up the various fluids and do the oiling and the checks and all of that, they're both going to break down. But the brakes are going to go, and the other one, the gearbox is going to go. And the mistake we've made is thinking, oh, it's a problem with the gearbox or it's a problem with the brakes, whereas actually it's a problem with the way we were driving the car and looking after it. So does that, I think that ties in with what you were saying before. Does that?
Yeah, for sure. I think it starts to provoke the thought of, well, what are these fundamental things that can cause problems? So you mentioned lack of proper nutrition. And I
Yeah.
think within that, from what I've been exploring recently, we've got to look at more than just food when we're talking about nutrition. I think light exposure, it could be argued, is equally important, maybe more. And thinking
Yeah.
perhaps about light as a nutrient and having
Mm,
the right types of light at the right times and the correct amount of exposure to them.
yeah.
So there are probably other things as well outside of food, perhaps clean air. But that crosses over, I think, into the other thing which you mentioned, which is toxicities coming in, and they could be a broad spectrum of things, couldn't they? From modern
Well,
man-made chemicals, radiation, electromagnetic fields.
electromagnetic
Yeah.
stuff. I think that's a
Hmm.
big that's a big hornet's nest, isn't it? The
Hmm.
electromagnetic stuff.
Yeah.
One that's potentially more difficult to deal with in a lot of places as well.
Mm.
But yeah, definitely part of the equation. I notice visibly now when I wake up in the morning, I know whether I forgot to turn my phone onto airplane mode or not, or switch it off. I can feel it in the morning when I've woken up. This doesn't feel right. First thing I do, check my phone. Shit, I didn't turn it off last
Mm.
night.
Hmm.
And so that, those types of things, people's awareness of that.
Then we've got the whole other bucket of stressors of psychological, emotional, uh, mental stressors as well, which tie into this. I don't know whether they fit into a toxicity bucket
Yeah,
or
well,
a
yeah,
nutrition bucket, or whether they're an overlapping thing. If you think about a Venn diagram. Um,
yeah. So for me, I think it's quite interesting what you say that the psychological stresses and how many of those are actually self-imposed. Um, as in we have certain personal expectations about very many things, and then often those expectations are conflicting. So I'll use myself as an example because I typically use my mum and she doesn't like it when I do that. So I use myself is I have this need for freedom and to know that I have this free time and that I've got this clear space in front of me. And I really value that. But the problem with it is that I will prioritize that freedom of time to do what I want to do. But then there are many things that I need to do from just a purely the administration of life point of view. Do my invoices so that I actually get paid at the end of the month. Do my exercise, practice what I preach, type of thing. You know, spend time with mum, dad, do the shopping, all of these types of things. But because I don't have a structure to my time and my week and my day, and this is something the two of us have talked to, that freedom, that's something that I value, that expectation that I have to have time for myself, never really is time for myself because there's always that little cloud hanging overhead which says, yeah, but you got this to do, and you got this to do, and you got this to do, and you got this to do. And I'm just trying to shut it out in the background. Yet the days where we've sat down and we've worked, and there's days where I really don't want to do it, but I know actually when I get into it, I feel like I do now. I feel quite energized and like, okay, we're getting in, we're working, my head's clear and stuff. And we've set out to do what we agreed to do for the day. I go away and great, now I can actually enjoy my free time. But the other way around, oh, I need to enjoy my free time, didn't work first. But another example is like, oh, I've got too much stuff. I need to get rid of it. An example, I know someone who does that. They want to get rid of it, but they won't throw it away. Oh, well, it's still useful. It could be used. It needs to, I either need to sell it or it needs to go to a charity shop. But that's too much for them to do. And so they never do either. They never get rid of the stuff because their own expectation in their head is it needs to be used by somebody else. It can't be thrown away. And so there's just this ongoing stress of a situation that never gets resolved. And trying to understand those little circular stuff, we get ourselves trapped in what I call prisons of the mind. All of the issues are in our mind, and we just somehow need to be able to reframe, prioritize what's really important to us, what's holding you back, what moves you forward, and to be able to let go of some things.
I can relate to what you're saying there, particularly about expectations and not being able to relax when you've got that weight of things that you feel like you should be doing. But I use this word productivity quite a lot, or productive rather. When I feel like I've been productive, then I feel like I've earned the right to switch off.
Yes.
Finding that balance for me is really important for my ability to just relax and but also feel like I'm moving forward with the things that I want to work on and improve.
Yeah, and I think that becomes interesting, doesn't it? Because I don't have the opposite view of you, but I am far less worried about being productive. I probably could do with being worried about being more productive, because that's one of the things that holds me back, in that I then don't get to achieve what I believe is my potential and the help that I could give not only to myself but to others and stuff like that. I think we have really important information here that other people need to know, and they can then decide whether to use it or not. But also being able to turn around what you said and so like, well, actually longevity and health and my ability to be productive consistently over time is to know that actually recovery is a really important part of that. So Steve Kotler talks about this in The Art of Impossible, is to get into flow, and being in flow is great, but it is actually very energy consuming. And for every period of flow that you have, you will need a period of recovery. And sometimes you didn't get the flow, but you will need to build the recovery to be able to get into flow again. So even though you didn't have the flow, something else has taken your resources. And so understanding this is this zooming in, zooming out thing. Yes, I like to have something that I've done every day and be productive, but actually rest isn't an earn you reward. Recovery isn't something you reward. It's what you need, regardless of the situation. If you need it, that's the way I look at it. I'm too far the other way. I suspect you're at the other end of the spectrum for me, and somewhere in the middle for both of us is that balance point where we recognize, actually, I do need to take recovery now, or even a reward.
Yeah, it was interesting what you started that whole train of thought with, was saying that you feel like you prioritize freedom and having free time very highly. I do too. That's something that I do, put a lot of value on. But yeah, it often gets squeezed out by feeling that I need to do something first to be entitled to that free time. And that list of things to do first is infinite. So it's knowing when to just say, okay, well, that's all that can be done. I have experimented a little bit in the past with just setting myself a certain amount of hours that I'm going to do in a day, whether that's 5 or 7 or however. And during those periods, great. But there are periods like now where we're working on something and we're excited about it. We're trying to build it up. We're both probably a little bit impatient, wanting to get to a certain point where it's going to be more than that rigid amount of hours. So I think, life goes through these seasons, doesn't it? And I
Yeah,
think as long as it does go through those seasons where you have a period that's more intense and a period that's less
yeah.
intense, um, I think that's fine.
And I think as well, what you find is that we build up, as you get more skillful at stuff, you build up an increasing capacity to do stuff. So, for instance, for me, needing to learn about a bit more technology, even something as simple as a decent camera to use and stuff like that, that's mentally quite demanding for me at the moment. But actually, the more I do it, the less mentally demanding it gets. So it becomes easier to do using CapCut. It's like, oh, it's a video editing software. It's horrible. But the more you do it, the better. And just realizing that and accepting that you might not be as productive or as efficient as you'd like to be initially, but that pretty much everything is a skill. And if we decide to work on that skill, we will get better at it. Especially if we've got good information, good coaching, good technique, stuff like that. That's why people go to coaches, isn't it? It's like, I think one trap I've fallen into a lot is thinking I have to do everything on my own. So running a business, I need it. My old boss, I was a freelance gym instructor and I was always late with my invoices. And she said, Mike, just let me do them for you. I like doing it. It's easy. It's just four lines on a template for you. And I'm like, no, I should be able to do this. I should be able to do this. And every month I was late. And then she's fine, let her do it. And when I let her do it, it was great. It was just a weight off my shoulders. So understand, expectations of ourselves and knowing that sometimes we're not good at stuff and we can get good at it, but maybe that's not what's best for us to be good at. I feel I'm quite good at talking into a camera. I'm not necessarily going to be the world's best video editor, and I'm not sure I'll ever really enjoy it that much. So if I can, I'm probably going to try and let somebody else do that who has a passion and a love for that. There's many ways in that those personal expectations can hold us back.